Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jill, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Resiliency Radio, your go-to podcast for the most cutting-edge insights in integrative and functional medicine. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. Jill, and with each episode, we dive into the heart of healing and personal transformation. I love bringing on friends, colleagues, experts, renowned world leaders in the world of biohacking, functional medicine, integrative medicine, and all things related to your health and optimal healing. The goal here is just to bring resources and information. And like you guys, I learn something on every single episode just so that you can thrive. And I feel like more than ever before in the new year, life is going at an accelerated pace. And so we need the grounding and the resources of friends and family and experts in our lives, helping us to achieve the best version of ourselves. Today, I'm interviewing a friend that I have known ever since I moved to Boulder. I think it was early on that we met and just have always respected her work. And today we're going to talk about a topic I bet is near and dear to many of your hearts, because if you don't suffer from sleep issues, then probably someone you know does. Today, the title, we're going to talk about the 5 types of insomnia, how to sleep well naturally through root cause healing. And we're going to talk to an expert and someone who I've always admired that does the work. Dr. Damiana Corca is Doctor of Acupuncture and Chinese Medicine, as well as a certified functional medicine practitioner, and she specializes in sleep disorders. The unique replenishing sleep framework is shared in her book, The Deep Blue Sleep, and it's accumulation of thousands of sleep healing sessions for more than a decade in clinical practice. She practices in the beautiful Boulder, Colorado, so we're neighbors, and she helps people sleep well over world, also by telehealth. So welcome, Damiana. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I so appreciate this and
You are
Happy New
so
Year.
welcome. Yeah, so welcome, and I'm so glad to have you. And again, this topic, I would say, the foundation of what I do too is like before we do anything with diet, nutrition, exercise, or supplements, or infection or toxin, we must be sleeping. Before we dive into the 5 types of sleep disorders, I want to know your story. Tell me, like, how did you get into acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine? Did you always know you were a healer? What was your path to what you do today?
I think deep down, I always felt this intuition that I'm going to go towards that healing side, but I had no idea how it was going to unfold. And actually, I went to school to be a teacher, and then I didn't like that. And I went to school to be a lawyer for a couple of years. And I remember this was back in Romania, actually in Transylvania. It was about a year and a half into law school, and I had this distinct thought that said, oh my gosh, if I continue, I will become a lawyer. And you'd think that would be obvious, but it was such a moment of like, if I follow through, I will become what I'm doing, and I don't want to be that. And then life happened, and it kind of fell on my lap. I call one of those godlike moments when God does its thing. And I actually went to acupuncture school in Florida and never even had an acupuncture session for myself in my life, which is very unusual. Most people have acupuncture, they love it, and or they've had an experience that was life changing, and then they go study acupuncture, and it wasn't the truth for me. I just met my now ex-husband, and
Yeah.
we have different people in our lives that serve different purposes, and I'm thankful to him for that because he introduced me to acupuncture.
Wow, I love the story because what you highlighted there, and I think listeners can relate, and I think more than ever, people are feeling this sense of, am I really doing my life's work? Am I really where I'm supposed to be? Do I have joy in waking up every day and going out and whatever it is that I do? And you can be manufacturing car parts, or you can be teaching or healing, or you can be any number of things, and you can have joy in what you do. But I love this, and I want to pause here because if you're out there listening and you're kind of feeling this unrest, and I just encourage you, and like you, believe in a higher power, and there's this oftentimes we have a still small voice that's very quiet, and if we're not listening and paying attention, sometimes it gets louder, and sometimes eventually it stops speaking altogether, and we get into our root. But I just want to encourage you out there, if you're feeling that little feeling like maybe there's something more, there probably is. And what happens is just like Damiana, your journey, at least in my life, it's been as I put myself out there and say, God, what would you have me to do? What's the next steps? He brings people, resources, and sometimes they're temporary for a time.
Yes.
Even I look at my ex-husband, he helped me start the practice that I have now. And then that was a time, and now it's not there. And I'm grateful for him for that. And so I do believe there's this ability for resources and people. And I would say often it's beyond our capacity. So we do our part. We show up, we do this, you enrolled in school, and then the people and the resources and the excitement start to confirm our suspicion that we're on that path. So I just want to pause because I think that's so important. And thank you for sharing your journey. So then you got into acupuncture, which again, you are esteemed, and I just love the work that you do. How did you get into thinking about insomnia? Because I have not met a lot of acupuncturists that focus solely on sleep disorders.
So I've always wanted to specialize. I remember having that thought in school. I thought, I am pretty smart, but I'm not that smart to like be able to know everything. And so I was like, oh, if I specialize, I'll probably be able to dive into that subject more. And while I was in school, I thought I'd specialize in neurological disorders because my dad had early onset Alzheimer's disease at 60. He passed away at 65. And of course, I was, from 14 to 17 or 18 years old, it left an impression on me. So when I went to college in my 20s, I thought that's something I'm passionate about. And so I studied and studied and then moved to Boulder, and it didn't feel right. I actually started feeling kind of depressed, and I didn't love it. And I remember this was maybe 2011, 2012. I was talking to someone and I thought, I do need to focus on something. I just don't know what it is. And it just came out of my mouth. And I said, oh, a lot of my patients don't sleep well. And I seem to keep focusing on them sleeping well. And when they do, everything else gets better. And as I said that out loud, I thought, oh, that's interesting. So, you know, gradually then over a couple of years I studied more and then I loved it and people came and I thought, oh, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. And once again, you put yourself out there, and then all of a sudden the
Yeah.
reassurance of the universe brings the people and
Yes.
that stuff. I think you and I talked really early on when you decided,
Yes.
because I remember you calling me
Yeah.
or we talked or had coffee, something, or I really remember you saying, I think now I'm going to go in this direction. And
Yes.
my heart was like, yes, because I knew that like it's such a big deal for people who aren't sleeping. And if you're out there and you're not sleeping, you're like, yes, anything I can help. So you've been doing this now with sleep, and you have a book out, The Deep Blue Sleep, where we'll make sure people can find that and get a copy if they want. It's now also recorded on Audible and audio. We talked about that too.
Yes.
What have you seen then in your path here? Let's just talk about the five types of insomnia. How do you kind of classify it, framework for those who are suffering?
Yeah, the framework came from the Chinese medicine perspective, and then really I integrated it within functional medicine because it seemed to fit so well. And there are five types. So we have the anxious type, the overthinking type, the overtaxed type, the depleted type, and the overburdened type. And these types, they're not meant to be labels necessary. It's just one day when I sat down and I thought if I could classify how insomnia shows up in people and how I try to help them every day to feel better, it seems like categorize the types of insomnia this way gives the most results. And hopefully today we'll go over these and I can explain, and then it will make a lot more sense why the names and how this all fits and what the root causes are, and especially from the functional medicine perspective, which is what my book is rooted in for sure, mainly.
Yes,
Yeah.
let's dive in because I'm anxious to hear about all of starting with the anxious type, right? Like I love it. And as you just said those names, I can picture like patients are coming to mind of each type. So let's dive in and just give us the types, give us like how that would present, and then we could dive into what you do differently for each type.
Yeah, so the anxious type, I believe that most people who have insomnia think they have anxiety, but actually can show up differently. And this anxious type is often driven by anxiety, and sometimes it's around the not sleeping in itself. And so there is a vicious cycle that happens where the anxiety worsens the ability to fall asleep, and then that exacerbates the anxiety further. But anyway, the main problem, if you struggle with falling asleep, like spending an hour or sometimes 2 hours, several hours, but usually it's around 2 hours, just lying awake, just anxiety kicks in. That's the anxious type. There is a secondary type that I see with the anxious type is early awakening, but it's not as common. So trouble falling asleep, that's kind of the main thing. And let me tell you a little bit about how I see it in the clinic. just how it can show up, how it can develop. So late teens, early adulthood, there can be erratic sleep patterns fueled by late nights as teenagers and electronic use and inconsistent schedules. And that can lead to that type of anxious insomnia, especially when people then try to have a regular schedule because now they have jobs, they're not in college anymore. Or if it doesn't start that early, it can start in like mid 30s. I feel like a lot of women, men too, but a lot of women, life's demands, career demands, pressure, relationship stress, sometimes, giving birth and caring for kids and such. And this type can also show up with perimenopause and menopause with the hormonal changes and cortisol level changes and such. So this type of insomnia, so as you can see, can span over decades, really. And for some people, it can start in their 20s, for some in their 30s, for some even in their 40s. But what's common is that anxiety, is the trouble falling asleep. And you've heard this, I bet, the wired and tired feeling in the evening and such. And people tend to want to read and then they put the book down. And sometimes that helps, and sometimes they're wide awake again, which is very, very, very frustrating when that happens. So there are two different ways, or they work together on how to solve this type of insomnia. For every type of insomnia, working with nourishing rituals, prioritizing slowing down, prioritizing rest and winding down, and also planned naps can be really, really helpful. And I know sometimes we have such a busy lives, and you could say, who has time for naps, but I've worked with a lot of patients, and most people seem to find 20 minutes in the middle of the day. I tell them if they can just lie down to rest, even if they don't fall asleep. That cues the parasympathetic nervous system that everything is okay, it's safe, and it breaks down that pattern of going, 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 going. That leads to more stress and anxiety and trouble falling asleep. And then winding down in the evening using guided meditations, reading, just prioritizing me time in the evening is really, really important. And then working with a practitioner, then we want to look at adrenal health, and the cortisol can spike a little bit in the evening. Cortisol has does so many wonderful things, but if it's imbalanced and it spikes in the evening, then and it raises just a little bit, we can feel that wired and tired kind of feeling. And then if it's more that you have trouble falling asleep in 30s and 40s, then we want to look at sex hormones as well, because of that perimenopause that can be they can last up to 12 years. And so slightly imbalanced sex hormones can also be rooted in and cause the trouble falling asleep. So those, I would say, kind of, when it comes to the anxious type, those are kind of the root causes and how to work with it.
Yeah, and it sounds real familiar. I can think of a lot of patients of
Yeah,
mine that deal with that. I love that you mentioned naps. I'm a huge fan of naps. And I can literally go lay down 20 minutes and my body almost knows without an alarm. And I go deep. I fall asleep and I wake up
nice.
so refreshed. But it's interesting. I never thought about it as a cue. Thank goodness I do sleep well. But then I also
Yeah.
have the rituals, right? Like if I want to go
Yeah.
to bed up by 10, I might start at 8:30 with
Yes.
getting my bath and stopping light devices and all those things. And that's just part of my habits, because years ago in medical school, even when I wasn't getting sleep, I was like, okay, foundation of healthy living is sleep, and I must sleep well. And then I started putting in just kind of non-negotiable things for my sleep. And thank goodness, again, I sleep really well. So what's the second type?
The second time, the type is the overthinking type. And anxiety and overthinking, you could say they overlap some, but you'll see that this is a bit different. The sleep challenge here is often associated with racing thoughts and an overactive mind. And I would say the most common root cause is digestive issues with overthinking type. And I like to point out to this Chinese medicine concept. When we think of digesting, we don't just digest food, but also we think of digesting thoughts. And so back then, thousands of years ago, they knew about this gut-brain connection. They didn't use the words that we use nowadays. They didn't know exactly about the vagus nerve or the second brain or anything like that, but they definitely knew something. And I see this all the time in my practice. So the main trouble, the main type of insomnia here is waking up around 1 or 2 a.m., feeling wide awake, usually for an hour or two. Just the mind is swirling with thoughts, work problems, but then sometimes it can be just like random thoughts or just a song being stuck in your head. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be worries. It's just a constant processing and rumination. There is a secondary type for the overthinking type is not as common, but also it can show up with trouble falling asleep. And the way it's different from the the anxious type is just kind of wide awake, cannot fall asleep, period. But the overthinking type that has trouble falling asleep at the beginning of the night when first going to sleep, they will be kind of in and out of sleep. They think they may have dozed off, maybe not, and it's just like the mind is very unfocused and such. So it's in a sense it's the same thing. It's just that the mind
Yeah.
can't it's just like keeps processing. It can't let go. And that's hard because sometimes that can, for some people, it can go on for a long time, especially if it starts at the beginning of the night. So I said digestive issues is a main part, but also blood sugar
Mhm.
fluctuations, low or high blood sugar can show up with those awakenings at 1, 2
Mhm.
a.m. Kind of wake up and you don't know what's going on. And then also hormonal changes. That's fairly common with perimenopause, menopause. Regardless if they're hot flushes or night sweats, I still see hormonal imbalances um, present there, or perimenopause and imbalanced hormones. And unfortunately, for some women, the gut, the blood sugar, and the sex hormone changes can happen all at the
Oh,
same
right.
time and
Yeah,
show up.
exactly.
Yeah, there's big connections between all of these three, especially perimenopause or in menopause
Yeah.
as well. So when I work with my patients on this type of insomnia, there are two layers. First is this psychological aspect, is like, how do I explain this? You know how we talk in gut health about leaky gut or intestinal permeability issues? Well, from the psychological perspective, I always think about leaky boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of we just have a hard time letting the day be what it was and moving to the night, creating those boundaries so we can relax and let go. And that's why for a lot of people it's very important, if you have that type of mind that can let go, is to have a proper wind down process that sometimes it can be 2, 3 hours, not even an hour and a half, but also 5, 6, 7 p.m. Just write down all the things that you like
Yeah.
circulate in your mind, and then every time the mind goes back, you can tell your mind, no, it's on that piece of paper. I'm just going to let go right now. I'm just going to put that aside. And tomorrow morning, when I wake up, I'll deal with it. Whether it's a complicated problem,
Right.
desperate problem, or just an easy thing like I have to pay a bill and I forgot again, is as easy
I
as that.
love that advice because personally, again, I sleep really well. But what happens, I'll even walk into my office in the morning and said, "Hey guys, I had a 2 a.m. thought," and I keep a journal by my bed. Now they don't keep me awake, but I have very often had something, either it's very important that I need to follow up on a patient or follow up on a to-do, or it might be a really good idea that I didn't have
Yes,
something, and it'll wake me up at 2, 3 some a.m. time, sometimes 4 a.m. And I will do that. I'll write it down, or sometimes my phone, I'll just put something in. I'm half asleep. I just, because it's like just offload, and then I'll get in the morning. But I've had some of my most brilliant ideas and
yes,
things that were really important to follow up on then. But I always know, just put it off. It'll be in the morning, there in the morning. And then I go right back
yes.
to sleep. So I
That's
love that you
great.
say that because it really is important, because there is a piece of our subconscious that's brewing, and part of the dream state, right, is this
Yes,
chewing on the day and making sense of it. And so I
yes.
find I often have the best thoughts and the best reminders at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m.
Exactly. So it's like whether it's a brilliant thought or a worrisome thought or a
Yeah.
song stuck in your
Yeah.
head, it's like the same
Yeah.
process. And
Yeah.
so the point is, can you go back to sleep as soon
Yeah.
as
And I
possible?
love
So,
that because, again, for me, it's just like, oh yeah, put it out there. And then I started having a journal by my bed because of that very thing. So love that. What's
yeah.
the third type, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so let me just finish this
Oh,
one.
sure.
I
Sorry.
think so again, working with a practitioner, we want to look at digestion, whether it's
Okay.
food sensitivities on elimination diet,
Mhm.
a comprehensive stool test, or if
Yeah.
there might be small intestine bacterial overgrowth, a breath test. And then if there is a blood sugar imbalance, I love the continuous glucose monitor, the CGMs. They're just so amazing because we get so much data that can tell us how to modify our diet and how to use supplements to heal that. And then the hormonal imbalances, again, maybe looking at saliva cortisol and also sex hormones to see how we can optimize those. But yeah, the overtaxed type, that's kind of like the I guess as you see stress and anxiety and overthinking, it's part of the first two, but this one is waking up too early in the morning. And this is not like 1, 2 a.m. This is more like 3, 4 a.m. or even like an hour before the usual wake up time. So it's just because of this modern, fast-paced lifestyle, constantly pushing boundaries and struggling to kind of balance life and winding down properly. So many people don't think about winding down when they have trouble waking up too early, but it's very important to wind down properly in the evening, because if we don't and you don't have trouble falling asleep, you do fall asleep and then you just sleep the minimum necessary to survive, which is about 5 hours. And you just survive. You don't thrive at all with 5 or 6 hours. You need more than that. And so, but the body wakes up and says, okay, now wake up and deal with whatever problem
Yeah.
whether it's some anxious problem or it's a physical stress on the body will wake up. So it's usually 3, 4 a.m. And this is more common in men, also women, but I would say this is definitely more common in men. I see it a lot. So waking up too early, kind of physically exhausted, but the mental activity is like, okay, I'm ready for the day. And it's just like, doesn't make sense because you're not ready for the day, but the mind is. And it's really hard to fall asleep. Or if you lie in bed for about 2 hours, as soon as it's time to wake up, you feel like, okay, now I'm sleepy, but it's too late.
Yeah.
So a lot of stress with this one, whether it's unprocessed emotional stress, frustration, fear, it could be kind of a lifestyle stress from irregular hours, too much screen time before bedtime. Just it could be intensified responsibilities that just challenges the body, can't really relax and sleep for 7.5, 8, 9 hours. And it could be also physical stress that I see. It's not the main area, but definitely like chronic inflammation, undiagnosed infections. And we'll talk more. There is a different type that I'll talk about soon about mold and food
Hmm.
sensitivities. And so that's kind of the overtaxed type. And again, winding down is very, very important. Also, it's important to prioritize enough time for restful sleep. Sometimes we just don't give ourselves enough time in bed. We go to sleep too late and then we wake up too early. It's when we're teenagers, you'd go to sleep at 2 a.m. and then sleep for the full 8, 9 hours. It doesn't work as
Right.
adults. If I go to sleep too late, then my usual time, I'll wake up too early, like earlier than usual, because the body thought, okay, something was wrong. Why did you go to sleep at midnight instead of 10?
Yes.
Um, so so using a lot of stress regulating tools such as meditation and adjusting the schedule, make sure we don't want to over exercise or prioritize exercise early in the morning. We really want to allow enough time, even though exercise is good for this type as well, but just not at the expense of enough time in bed. That's very, very important. And then cortisol imbalance is a big thing, and sometimes sleep apnea can show up with this type, though the following couple of ones shows up more commonly as well. So yeah, that's
Very
the
good. On to
first
type
type.
4. So good.
Yeah. And then the depleted type, this is a little bit kind of its own special categories. People similar to the previous one, they also wake up after like 4, 5, 6 hours, but it shows up in people like 60s and above. And it's like it's different. They don't even feel stressed. They're just done. We notice a lot in the elder population. They're like, I don't know why I can't sleep. It's not like we don't need it. We need it
Yeah.
badly, even more so as we age, but they just can't. Um, and I feel like what's happening from the Chinese medicine perspective, and then to put it in more kind of modern terms, is like in Chinese medicine, we talk about these, we have the yin and yang, and then we have these yin fluids. And from the modern perspective, these fluids, we think of sex hormones and neurotransmitters and maybe digestive enzymes and all of these necessary kind of Chinese medicine, we call them fluids, but they're not that,
Yeah.
but I gave you some examples, but they're not at optimal ranges anymore. And that's to be expected as we age. So they don't have to be as high as they were when we were 20 or 30, but we just have to have enough to maintain that longer sleep. So for this type, I feel like it takes longer to heal, and it may never be perfect, but trying to identify like are the neurotransmitters really depleted,
Yeah.
and whether it's like we're working on the gut and make sure we digest protein so we can make
Mhm.
tryptophan, so we can make serotonin, or just simply supplementing with the right things, or if they're genetic factors, and work with someone that can look into that and say, oh my gosh, this COMT gene is really important for you. We should really look into that because I think it has a lot to do with your sleep, or maybe it's like chronic gut infections. Like we want to look kind of holistically and try to build everything just enough so you can sleep. It doesn't have to be perfect because people ask me, well, I am 75, like I'm not
Yeah.
20 anymore. And the point is you don't have to have enough, like the same levels as you are 20. We just need to have enough of those.
Yeah. That makes a
So
lot of sense. I've seen quite a few of those as well.
yeah, and that's why it's very people, especially for this type and the other types too, but this type and the following one, when people just try to take a medication and it doesn't work, you can see why, because it's just a little more complicated than that. Um, Sometimes it works, the medication or the supplement, but sometimes it doesn't, because of that reason, because it's a little more
Yeah.
complex.
Yeah.
And then the last type is the overburden type. This is also its own kind of special of category. A lot of people describe as they're kind of restless all night long and feel like they even say sometimes, I feel like sometimes pull me out of sleep. And for me, I call it kind of like there is this irritant that doesn't allow them to sleep. There might be a depletion of
Mhm.
certain things, but also the main thing is the irritant, whether that is an infection like Epstein-Barr virus, or it could be Lyme or mold. Mold is a very common one. I had a patient today, just like that. He says, I'm tired, but I can function. And I feel like all night long I'm in and out of sleep. And then we tested and he has
Yeah.
mold. And then he just got the results right now. And he was told by the lab that he's in the 7% upper
Wow.
limit of so he has a lot of mold in
Yeah.
his house basically. So
Yeah.
and it was just like by the book. I felt like, it felt so validating. I'm like, that makes so much sense to
Yeah.
me, exactly how he described it, and that was the problem, or the main
Wow.
problem for him. So other issues could be heavy metals, a lot of gut imbalances that are very chronic and can show up in this overburden. But sleep apnea is also,
Uh-huh.
especially when it's moderate to severe, sleep apnea will feel like something pulls you out of sleep all night long. And some people are aware that their breathing is not quite right. And some people have no idea. They wake up in the morning exhausted and have no idea why. Um, and then when it's more mild to moderate, I feel like sleep apnea can show up with early awakenings,
Mhm.
either kind of in and out, like the second type of the anxious type, or the overtaxed type. But when it's more severe, I feel like that this is how it shows up. And so doing a sleep study is always helpful just to make sure that's not a
Yeah.
factor. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So fascinating because I can, like I said, think of all kinds of patients in each of these categories. And um, it's interesting because with chronic complex illness like I do, I have a lot of the fifth type there that is
Yes.
much more vague in a way. It's not like a
Yes.
real clear. Do you have in your book a quiz or a way for people to kind of
Oh, yeah. I have a
categorize?
quiz on my website.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. So be
About the
sure to
five
share.
types. So it can kind of they can help them figure out.
Okay.
And I find it, it is my own quiz,
Uh-huh.
obviously, and I did my best, but now a lot of people have taken it, and I feel like people take it, come in my practice, and maybe feels like 80 to 90%
Yeah.
it matches.
Wow, that's pretty
Or so,
amazing. What's your
yeah,
website? We'll mention it again, but for now, as people are
yeah.
listening, where do people find that?
It's my first and last name.com, so it's DamianaCorca.com.
And go ahead and spell it just in case.
Yes, DamianaCorca.com.
Perfect. And of course, if you're listening or driving, don't write it down. We'll leave it in the show notes and everything
Yes.
for that. I love these categories because it really, really helps to clarify. And even as you were going through, I could just patient after patient, like, oh yeah, that's probably that. And obviously, a functional practitioner, you're looking at not just the acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, which is
Mhm.
amazing, but also the hormones, neurotransmitters. What do you find? Do you take everyone through a workup, or does it depend on the type that you kind of have them fit into? Because it sounds like hormones, blood sugar,
Yeah.
neurotransmitters are common to many of these types. Is there any core workup that someone listening would want to ask their doctor about or do, regardless of the type?
Yeah, I think basic blood work is
Yeah.
helpful and looking at those optimal ranges. And then because people are usually so desperate to get sleep, I very often I will do the saliva cortisol testing. So I do six
Yeah.
samples throughout the day and one extra at night if they
Perfect.
wake up in the middle of the night or too early. And then the neurotransmitter test. Now, the neurotransmitter test, I feel like there is not a lot of scientific data to show that is valid, but I've used it since I think 2019. And I tell people over and over again, I find it helpful because it takes a little bit the guess out of the work. And so whether serotonin or GABA or glycine or all these calming neurotransmitters are a bit too low, usually,
Yeah.
or dopamine, histamine, PEA, whatever is too high, then even if it's not exact, it gives me an idea of what's going on. And that test is not even that expensive. It's around $200. And I find it so valuable first to see what can we do immediately, but also like read through the lines, like why is that high? Well, why are those two things too high or too low? There are usually some correlations, whether it's B6 deficiency or so
Yeah.
many things, as you know.
I could not agree more. And I love that because I have the same thing. I'm like, the science is a little weak. And so I'm always like, okay, this is, I frame it. But clinically,
Yeah,
I have found it as well to be incredibly useful. And
yeah,
incredibly, when I do an intervention based on the data, I get
hmm,
results. So it just my clinical experience, like yours,
yeah,
is it's
yeah,
really good. And I use
yeah.
it. There's a couple labs out there that do it. Do you have any preferences of who you
I
use?
use ERT.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah.
Fantastic. I think doctor's data has one too. But use
I
the OT.
haven't used it. I mean, I
Yeah.
could to just try it out, but I've had such a
Yeah, I
good
do
result
too.
with
I've from the
ERT that
very beginning, ZRT was one of the ones I used in the
yeah,
beginning. And then obviously sleep apnea is really huge that we want to rule that out. So you're probably sending them to a sleep study for
yes,
many people just to be sure
yeah,
that you're not dealing with that.
definitely.
One last topic we didn't cover that I think is interesting is children. I don't know how many children you see, but say I mean, obviously like teenagers who are staying up too late, screen time's a huge thing. There's lots
Yeah.
of other things that are in that population. But if there really is a issue with a child, is there anything differently, like say 8 to 18 years old? I'm not talking about infants, of course, but any issues that you would look differently at a child who's suffering from insomnia?
Like how old? Like about
Let's
you?
just say 16. Let's give it
Oh,
16-year-old.
16.
Yeah.
Not much difference. Once
Yeah.
I feel like once it goes about 15, 16, it very similar issues. But a lot of anxiety. I feel like there is a lot of just anxiety of how to function in this world
Yeah.
that's changing so
Yes.
fast. And then whether they're gut issues or
Mhm.
a tendency towards issues with neurotransmitters.
Right.
And then it gets down to toxins where they're exposed to
Yes.
mold. These are the things that I most commonly see.
I couldn't agree more. And I find the kiddos, when we get those right, they turn around actually way quicker than us
Yeah,
adults, right?
yeah,
Oh,
exactly. Yeah, because
amazing.
they're so much more
Yeah.
resilient and it
Yeah.
is if you find the right thing immediately, it starts changing.
Well, Dr. Corca, my friend, I'm so grateful that you years ago felt this calling into this area because it's so needed and you do an amazing work. And
Thank
it's
you.
really been fascinating to hear just the categories and how simplified it's been. You're able to, put that information out in a way that's so understandable. And I know the listeners have benefited. If people want to get your book or find more about you, I know you mentioned the website. Is there anywhere else? Would you have the book on the website? Where do you recommend they get the book?
They can go to the website. Here is the book
Perfect. Yes, yes,
right
love it.
here. But it is on Amazon and it's available in the audio version. I know personally I listen to books a lot, and then
Yeah,
if I
me
really
too.
need to buy it on paperback, but also people prefer that, and that's available as well. And yeah, my website, as I said, is my first and last name, DamianaCorca.com. The book is there, the quiz is there. I highly recommend the quiz.
Yeah, we'll
And
link to that. So if you're watching, I want to take the quiz. We'll check it out.
yes,
Very, very good. And then, of course, if you guys are local, I do have a lot of people who listen that are locally. You're in Boulder, Colorado, right? So you're
yeah.
probably taking clients. And you mentioned virtually. Do you actually see patients virtually as well?
Yeah, I do. I consult with people, and thankfully, here in the US and Europe, actually, it's so easy to use all the functional medicine testing. And so I have the large majority of my patients are still local, but the telehealth one is increasing more and more as I get more comfortable. I'm so used to using acupuncture together with
Hmm.
functional medicine, but in the last couple of years, the other, and it works just fine. And so I'm happy to serve someone who doesn't live in Boulder, Colorado, or the area through telehealth. I've
Fantastic.
helped a lot of people, so, but I
Yes.
still love my acupuncture. And if so, someone
Uh-huh.
is listening is in the area, I'd be happy to help with both acupuncture and functional medicine.
Yeah, we were saying before we got on here, I'm gonna have to, you're so close, right? I have to come visit you and just say, hey, can I get, I need to get a
That would be
treatment. So to
lovely.
get on the schedule. Well, thank you so much for the work that you've done. Thank you for your book, The Deep Blue Sleep. You guys can find it on Amazon or DamianaCorca.com. And thanks again for your brilliant work in the world. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining me on this great episode with Dr. Damiana Corca. I love those categories for sleep, and I know many of you who've suffered from insomnia probably found that really useful. I hope you'll go and take her quiz and check out her website, DamianaCorca.com. And as you guys know, you can find all of the episodes here on JillCarnahan.com in transcriptions and recordings. And now we're well on our way to almost 300 episodes. And if you're listening or watching on YouTube and you haven't yet subscribed, I hope you'll click that button to subscribe and notify for new episodes. We have brand new episodes coming out each week on Wednesday. And stay tuned for more great information. I'll see you next week.